Before we get started, make sure to subscribe to the channel and like this video. That way, you'll always stay connected to our stories and never miss the next adventure. Nobody actually expected the human to survive his first week at the Galactic Rehabilitation Station. And yet, here we are, 3 months in, and Carter is not only alive, but thriving in ways that make absolutely no sense to anyone with a functioning survival instinct. The station itself hung in orbit around Quelmshaw like a massive metallic flower, each petal a different habitat dome designed to house the galaxy's most endangered, most dangerous, and, let's be honest, most likely to eat you species. The whole operation was funded by the Galactic Conservation Collective, which sounds noble until you realize it's mostly guilt money from corporations that strip-mined entire ecosystems and now want good publicity. Carter was supposed to be an advisor, just an advisor. The humans had recently joined the galactic community, and someone in the collective thought it would be progressive and inclusive to hire one for the xenobiology team. Give the newcomers a chance to contribute, show them the ropes, all that diplomatic nonsense. What they didn't count on was that humans have a very different definition of the word advisor than the rest of the galaxy. Where a sensible Quelthian advisor might observe from behind 6 layers of reinforced glass and offer suggestions via encrypted datapad, Carter walked into enclosures. Where a reasonable Vextorian would run probability simulations and recommend sedation protocols, Carter just sort of made friends. It was unhinged. It was reckless. It was working, and that made it so much worse. Keshmara had compound eyes, which meant the insectoid supervisor could watch Carter's antics from multiple angles simultaneously, while also reviewing station reports and questioning every life choice that led to this moment. All 6 of their limbs twitched in agitation as they observed the human through the observation deck's floor-to-ceiling windows. "He is going to get himself killed," Keshmara chittered to nobody in particular, mandibles clicking in a rhythm that translated to profound distress. "And then I will have to file paperwork. So much paperwork. Humans generate paperwork, like Quelthians generate slime." The human in question was currently inside the habitat of a Vexthulian razorback, a creature that looked like someone had taken a boar, scaled it up to the size of a small transport shuttle, given it plates of natural armor, and then decided that wasn't quite deadly enough, so they added venomous quills. The species was critically endangered, mostly because they kept killing each other over territory disputes. Carter was scratching behind its ear ridge. The razorback was making a sound that the galaxy's best xenolinguists had previously categorized as a pre-attack warning growl. Carter had apparently reclassified it as purring. "This is fine," Keshmara lied to themselves. "This is completely fine and normal, and not at all a sign that humans are collectively insane." The truth that nobody wanted to admit was that Carter had a gift. In the 3 months since his arrival, he'd successfully calmed 6 different species that the station's previous staff had only been able to manage with heavy sedation and remote feeding systems. He'd also somehow taught a Quelmshan stalker to play fetch, which shouldn't have been possible because stalkers don't have a play drive, they have a murder drive, but apparently nobody told the stalker that. The universe has a sense of humor, though, and it was about to deliver the punchline. The alert came through on Keshmara's communication implant at what the humans called O Dark 30, which was a ridiculous name for a time of day, but somehow perfectly captured the feeling of being woken up for an emergency. A new arrival. Unscheduled. The transport pod was already docking. By the time Keshmara made it to the receiving bay, half the station staff was already there, keeping a very healthy distance from the reinforced containment unit that had just been unloaded. The manifest data scrolled across Keshmara's vision, and their anterior legs nearly buckled. Night Fang, juvenile, Quelmshan apex predator, orphaned. "Oh, blessed hive queens," Cheshmara whispered. "We are all going to die." Night fangs were the stuff of legend and nightmares, usually in that order. They were what happened when evolution decided that simply being at the top of the food chain wasn't enough. You needed to be so terrifyingly efficient at murder that your very existence kept entire ecosystems in check. They had crystalline fangs that could shear through durasteel, 6 limbs that ended in retractable claws, and a hunting intelligence that some xenobiologists argued was sapient adjacent. An adult night fang could take down a cargo hauler. A juvenile could still absolutely ruin your entire day, week, and possibly genetic lineage. The containment unit shuddered. Something inside was slamming against the walls, and the sound echoed through the bay like thunder. The creature was scared, aggressive, and strong enough that the reinforced plating was actually denting. "We need sedation protocols," Fenthqua squawked. The avian security officer's feathers were puffed up to twice his normal size, which in his species indicated either extreme agitation or mating season, and, given the circumstances, probably the former. "We need them now, we need them strong, and we need someone to authorize hazard pay." "Agreed," Cheshmara said, already running calculations. The problem was that night fangs were notoriously resistant to most standard sedatives, and the ones that did work required precise dosing based on body mass, which they couldn't measure while the creature was trying to break out of its container. That's when Carter walked in, carrying what appeared to be a cup of coffee and looking like he'd just rolled out of bed, which he probably had. "Morning," he said, with the kind of casual cheer that made Cheshmara want to check him for brain parasites. "What's all the Phoebe excitement about?" "Night Fang," Cheshmara said flatly. "Juvenile, orphaned, traumatized, extremely dangerous. We are currently debating sedation methods that won't accidentally kill it." Carter took a sip of his coffee and walked closer to the containment unit. Everyone else instinctively took 3 steps back. "Huh," he said, peering through the small observation window. "She's scared." "It is a night fang," Fenthqua said, as if speaking to a particularly slow child. "Fear is what they inspire, not what they experience." "Everything gets scared," Carter replied, and there was something in his tone that made it sound less like an opinion and more like a fundamental law of the universe. "Look at her pupils. Look at the way she's moving. That's not aggression. That's panic." Cheshmara looked. Their compound eyes were excellent at processing multiple visual inputs, and now that Carter mentioned it, the pattern did seem more consistent with fear responses than predatory behavior. The hits against the container walls weren't rhythmic or calculated. They were desperate. "We still cannot simply open the containment unit," Cheshmara said. "Even a frightened night fang is lethally dangerous." "So we move her to a habitat first," Carter said. "Let her decompress. Then we can assess." It took 2 hours, 3 emergency meetings, and 1 minor existential crisis on Cheshmara's part, but they eventually managed to transfer the night fang to a specially reinforced habitat in the high-security wing. The creature had bolted into the farthest corner the moment the containment unit opened, which was actually encouraging. It meant she was more interested in hiding than fighting. She was, objectively speaking, beautiful in the way that natural disasters are beautiful. Her fur was the deep purple-black of a Quelmshan night sky, shot through with bioluminescent stripes that pulsed with her rapid heartbeat. The crystalline fangs that gave her species their name caught the habitat's artificial light and scattered it into rainbow fragments. She was about the size of an earth lion cub, which meant she was already large enough to be extremely dangerous. Her eyes, all 6 of them, arranged in 2 rows of 3, were locked on the observation window where the entire station staff had gathered to watch. "Beautiful," Tabitha breathed. The human engineer had joined them, along with Kwame, the botanist who maintained the station's hydroponic systems. "Absolutely gorgeous." "Absolutely deadly," Keshmara corrected. "Those two," Tabitha agreed cheerfully. The debate about what to do next lasted another hour and went nowhere productive. Standard protocol said to wait, observe, establish baseline behavior patterns before attempting any direct interaction. That process usually took weeks. The Night Fang needed food, water, and basic medical assessment to ensure she hadn't been injured during transport. Someone would have to go in there. Nobody wanted to go in there. "I'll do it," Carter said. The silence that followed was the kind usually reserved for moments right before something explodes or someone says something catastrophically stupid. Sometimes both. "Absolutely not," Keshmara said. "You are not trained for apex predator protocols. You have no experience with night fangs specifically. And you are, I say this with all due respect, out of your mandible-cursed mind." Carter smiled. And not for the first time, Keshmara noticed that humans really did show their teeth when experiencing positive emotions, which was objectively terrifying from an evolutionary standpoint. "I've worked with big cats, wolves, and bears back on Earth," Carter said. "Apex predators are apex predators. The specifics change, but the fundamentals don't." "This is not a bear," Fenthqua interjected. "This is a night fang. They are called that because they hunt in darkness, and their bite is the last thing you experience before death." "Cheerful," Carter said, "but she's also a scared kid who just lost her family and got shoved in a box and shipped across space. So, yeah, I'm going in." There was something in the way he said it that made arguing feel pointless. Keshmara had noticed this about humans. When they decided something, they developed this peculiar form of momentum that was very difficult to redirect. Like an asteroid on a collision course, except the asteroid was making active choices, and those choices were baffling. "If you die," Keshmara said slowly, "I am putting ignored all safety protocols on your death certificate." "Fair," Carter agreed. The habitat airlock felt like it took forever to cycle, which gave everyone watching plenty of time to contemplate the various ways this could go wrong. The list was extensive, and mostly ended with the word fatality. Carter stepped through. The Night Fang's bioluminescent stripes flared bright, a threat display. She lowered her head, and a sound emerged from somewhere deep in her chest that made the observation window vibrate. It was the kind of sound that evolution had specifically designed to trigger every prey instinct in any species with functioning survival mechanisms. Carter stood still. Not frozen, not paralyzed by fear, just still, with the kind of intentional calm that suggested he knew exactly what he was doing, even if what he was doing was absolutely unhinged. "Hey there, sweetheart," he said softly. "I know. Big day. Everything's scary and loud and wrong, and you just want to go home." The Night Fang's growl deepened. Carter took one step forward. Just one. Slow, deliberate, non-threatening. "Nobody here wants to hurt you," he continued, voice steady and low. "I know you don't believe that yet, but it's true. You're safe now." Another step. The Night Fang's haunches tensed, preparing to spring. "I'm going to leave some food over here," Carter said, pulling a sealed container from his pocket and setting it on the ground. "And some water. You don't have to take it now. Whenever you're ready." He didn't back away immediately. That would signal fear, retreat, prey behavior. Instead, he simply turned at an angle, presenting his side rather than his back, and walked at the same measured pace toward the airlock. The Night Fang didn't attack. She didn't relax either. But she didn't attack, and in the world of apex predator management, that counted as a win. "Well," Tabitha said, as Carter emerged from the habitat, "that was either very brave or very stupid." "Usually both," Kwame added. Carter just shrugged and went to get more coffee. Over the next week, the pattern repeated. Carter would enter the habitat twice daily, leave food and water, speak in that same calm tone, and leave without incident. The Night Fang, still unnamed, still wary, began to eat the food after he left. Then she began to eat, while he was still in the habitat, though she maintained her distance. Keshimara watched every session, documenting everything, because if this somehow worked, it would revolutionize their entire approach to high-risk species management. If it didn't work, well, at least they'd have footage for the investigation. On the 9th day, something changed. Carter entered as usual, set down the food as usual. But this time, instead of leaving, he sat down on the habitat floor, cross-legged, about 5 meters from where the Night Fang typically positioned herself. "What is he doing?" Keshimara chittered. "What is he doing? Why is he doing it? Who authorized this deviation from protocol?" The Night Fang watched Carter with all 6 eyes. Her bioluminescent stripes pulsed in a pattern that xenolinguists had tentatively identified as curiosity. Carter didn't move, didn't speak, just sat there, breathing slowly, being present. 5 minutes passed, 10, 15. The Night Fang stood. Her muscles rippled under that midnight fur as she moved, each step silent despite her size. She approached slowly, head low, eyes locked on the human. 3 meters. 2 meters. 1. She was close enough now that Carter could have reached out and touched her, which was also close enough that she could have ended him in about 6 different ways. He didn't reach out, didn't move at all, except for the slight rise and fall of his breathing. The Night Fang leaned forward, nostrils flaring as she scented him. Then, and every being watching held their breath, she opened her mouth, revealing those crystalline fangs that had given her species their fearsome reputation. And she bit his hand. Not hard, not yet. Just a testing pressure, fangs resting against skin, waiting to see what this strange creature would do. The thing about pain is that your body wants you to react to it. Evolution spent millions of years hardwiring those responses. Pull away, fight back, flee, make noise. Do literally anything except stand there like an idiot while something with crystalline fangs tests your commitment to staying alive. Carter's entire nervous system was screaming at him to move. He didn't. The observation room had gone so quiet that you could have heard a pin drop in vacuum. Keshimara's mandibles had frozen mid-click. Tabitha had both hands pressed against the glass. Fenthqua had stopped breathing, which for an avian species was particularly notable. Every being watching understood what they were seeing, the exact moment before disaster, the split second before everything went catastrophically wrong. But here's what they didn't understand, couldn't understand, because they'd never been there themselves. This moment was everything. Carter kept his eyes on the Night Fang. Not aggressive eye contact, not a stare down, just present, acknowledging her. His hand remained exactly where it was, resting palm up on his knee, those crystal fangs pressing against the soft flesh of his palm, with enough pressure to dimple the skin, but not yet break it. The cub was testing him. Simple as that. In her world, in the world of apex predators and survival and the harsh mathematics of who gets to live and who becomes dinner, this was a question. What are you? Prey or something else? Prey ran. Prey screamed. Prey bled and begged and died. Carter did none of those things. His mind flashed back, he couldn't help it, to a winter morning in the mountains back home, years ago now, but still vivid. There'd been a wolf sanctuary in the Rockies where he'd volunteered during college. One of the rescues, a big male named Ghost, had done almost exactly this same thing during their first meeting. Teeth on skin, eyes locked, waiting. The supervisor had been watching from a distance, ready to intervene, probably already composing the incident report in his head. Carter had understood then what he understood now. Fear was honest, but panic was deadly. The wolf needed to know if this human was safe, if this human understood the language of teeth and dominance and trust. So Carter had stood there, heart hammering but hands steady, and waited for Ghost to decide. Ghost had let go, licked his hand, accepted him into the pack hierarchy somewhere between Omega and useful idiot who brings food. The Nightfang's pupils were doing something interesting. They'd been narrow slits when she first bit down, focused, intense, predatory. But as the seconds stretched on and Carter refused to react like prey, they began to dilate. Wider, rounder. The bioluminescent stripes along her flanks shifted from the sharp blue of threat display to something softer, more uncertain. She'd never encountered anything like this before. "Come on, sweetheart," Carter murmured, voice barely above a whisper. "I know you're scared. I know everything's wrong and strange and you miss your family. But I'm not going to hurt you, and I'm not going to run from you. We're just going to be here together, okay? Just be here." The pressure on his hand lessened. Just slightly. Just enough to matter. In the observation room, Keshmara was experiencing what could only be described as a philosophical crisis. Their entire understanding of predator-prey dynamics, built on decades of xenobiology study and practical experience, was being challenged by a human who apparently decided that survival instincts were optional. "This is not possible," they chittered quietly. "This violates at least 3 established theories of apex predator behavior. Possibly 4. Maybe I should check 5 to be safe." "Humans," Tabitha said, and somehow that single word contained multitudes. The Nightfang shifted her weight, muscles rippling. For a heartbeat, Keshmara thought she was preparing to bite down properly, to finish what she'd started. Every alarm instinct they possessed fired at once. But instead, the cub did something that would later be analyzed in academic papers across the galaxy. She opened her mouth and released Carter's hand. Then she sat back on her haunches. Then, and this is the part that made Keshmara question their grip on reality, she lowered her head and pressed it against Carter's chest. The sound that escaped from Fenthqua's beak was somewhere between a gasp and a squawk, and a cry of existential despair. In Quelmshan body language, what the Nightfang had just done was unambiguous. It was submission. It was trust. It was the gesture a cub makes to a parent, a subordinate makes to pack leader, a creature makes when it decides that maybe, just maybe, it's safe. Carter's hand, the one that had been in those deadly jaws moments before, slowly, carefully, moved up to scratch behind the ridge where the Nightfang's primary and secondary ears met. The sound that came from the cub was not a growl. It was not a threat. It was a rumble, low and resonant, that vibrated through her entire body. She was purring. A Nightfang, an apex predator, was purring. "I need to sit down," Keshmara said. "You have 6 legs," Tabitha pointed out. "You're basically already sitting." "I need to sit down more," Carter stayed in the habitat for another 20 minutes, just existing in the same space as the cub, letting her get used to his presence, his scent, the fact that he was neither food nor threat, nor anything that fit into her inherited understanding of how the universe worked. When he finally stood to leave, the Night Fang watched him go, with something that looked remarkably like disappointment. The debrief that followed was chaos. Fenthqua wanted to implement immediate protocols to replicate Carter's success with other dangerous species. Kwame wanted to study the biochemical markers of cross-species bonding. Tabitha wanted to name the cub because apparently going through a near-death experience together meant you earned naming rights. Keshmara just wanted to understand how any of this was possible. "Explain it to me," they demanded, cornering Carter in the station's commissary, where he was eating something that looked vaguely like noodles, but probably wasn't. "Explain how you knew she would not simply bite your hand off." Carter looked up from his meal, considered the question, and shrugged in that infuriatingly casual human way. "I didn't know," he said. "Not for certain, but I understood what she needed." What she needed was food and shelter and medical assessment, Cheshmara countered. Not a behavioral psychology experiment that could have resulted in your death. "She needed to know she wasn't alone," Carter said quietly. "She's a baby, Keshmara. A baby who watched her family die, got stuffed in a box by strangers, and shipped across space to a place where everything smells wrong and sounds wrong and feels wrong. Food and shelter are important, sure, but what she needed most was for someone to see her as more than a threat or a specimen or a problem to be managed." There was something in the way he said it that made Keshmara's antenna twitch. This wasn't academic theory. This was personal experience talking. "You have been that baby," Keshmara said. Not a question. Carter's smile was small and sad. Different circumstances. "But yeah, I've been the scared kid in a strange place, surrounded by people who didn't know what to do with me. Someone showed me kindness when they didn't have to. Changed everything." Before Keshmara could respond, Tabitha burst into the commissary with the kind of energy that suggested either excellent news or impending disaster. "We need a name," she announced. "The cub needs a name. We can't keep calling her the Night Fang like she's a species classification instead of an individual." "Names imply attachment," Fenthqua pointed out, having followed Tabitha in. "Attachment to a creature that will eventually need to be released back into the wild." "If she survives that long," Kwame added, joining the growing crowd. "Orphaned cubs have low survival rates, even in captivity. In the wild, without a pack to teach her to hunt, without the protection of adults, her chances are minimal." The silence that followed was heavy. Carter set down his fork. "Then we teach her." "We are not Night Fangs," Keshmara said. "We cannot teach her to be what she is." "No," Carter agreed, "but we can teach her to survive, to trust, to be strong enough that, when it's time, she can find her own pack or make her own way. That's enough." Tabitha grinned. "So we're keeping her?" "We're rehabilitating her," Carter corrected. "There's a difference." "Sure," Tabitha said, in a tone that suggested she didn't believe that for a second. "So, name?" Carter thought about it, about the way the cub had been so silent during that entire encounter, even when testing his hand with her fangs. About the way her threat displays were more desperation than genuine aggression. About the soft sound she'd made when he scratched behind her ears. "Whisper," he said. Fenthqua's feathers ruffled. "That is ironic to the point of absurdity. Night Fangs are known for roars that can shatter glass." "Exactly," Carter said, and smiled. "She'll grow into it." And somehow, watching the human's expression, Seeing the absolute certainty in his eyes, Cheshmara believed him. 6 weeks later, the Galactic Rehabilitation Station had become ground zero for what the xenobiology community was calling the human phenomenon, which sounded much more scientific than "those crazy primates are befriending things that should eat them." Whisper had grown. Not massively, she was still adolescent-sized, but enough that she now weighed about as much as an earth grizzly, and could probably arm-wrestle one to a draw. Her bioluminescent stripes had settled into a pattern that Carter swore indicated mood, though Keshmara remained skeptical about his ability to read Night Fang emotions through light displays. The skepticism lasted until they watched Whisper's stripes flash bright green the moment Carter entered her habitat each morning, which every database agreed was the Night Fang equivalent of pure joy. "This is unprecedented," Keshmara muttered, updating their research notes for the 15th time that week. Complete behavioral modification in an apex predator based solely on social bonding with an alien species. The academic papers practically write themselves. "The academic papers can wait," Tabitha said, not looking up from her datapad. "Have you seen what happened in the Vexthulian enclosure?" She pulled up video footage. There was Kwame, the botanist who had absolutely no business being anywhere near a creature with venomous quills, sitting cross-legged in the razorback's habitat while the massive beast rested its head in his lap. The razorback's usual aggressive posture had been replaced by something that looked suspiciously like contentment. "He learned it from Carter," Tabitha continued. "Said if a human could bond with a Night Fang, he could manage a razorback. Took him 3 weeks, but there you go." Keshmara's mandibles clicked in agitation. "This is spreading. The humans are spreading their bizarre bonding behavior like a virus." "A helpful virus," Fenthqua interjected, preening his feathers. "Our incident reports are down 60%. Stress markers in the animals are at all-time lows, and we have not had to use heavy sedation protocols in over a month. The collective is pleased." "The collective does not have to watch humans walk into death traps twice daily and somehow walk back out unharmed," Keshmara countered. But even as they said it, they knew the truth. Carter had been right. The other humans had been right. Whatever strange capability their species possessed, this aggressive pack-bonding instinct that made them look at apex predators and see potential friends, it worked. It worked terrifyingly well. Keshmara had started compiling data. They couldn't help themselves. Proper scientific documentation was hardwired into their nature. The evidence was mounting into a theory that kept them up during their rest cycles. Humans were predators. Not in the obvious way, not like Night Fangs or razorbacks, or any of the species in the rehabilitation habitats. Humans were predators in a much more unsettling fashion. They had binocular vision, forward-facing eyes designed for tracking prey. They had persistence, the ability to simply keep going long after any sensible creature would have given up. They had those unnerving smiles that displayed teeth, which in virtually every species was a threat display. But more than that, they had something the galaxy had never encountered: the ability to turn other predators into allies. On Earth, they had taken wolves, pack hunters, apex predators in their own right, and turned them into dogs, companions, friends. They had done the same with cats, with horses, with dozens of species that should have been competitors or threats. They didn't dominate through force or fear. They dominated through relationship, through trust, through the simple act of convincing other creatures that being part of a human's pack was better than being alone. And now they were doing it to alien species. "We are all doomed," Keshmara said aloud. "Probably," Tabitha agreed cheerfully, walking past with a container of treats for the stalker that had learned to play fetch. But at least we'll be doomed with awesome friends. The intercom crackled. Keshmara, we have a situation in the observation lounge. Of course they did. The observation lounge was where visiting dignitaries and collective officials could view the habitats without risking direct contact. It was supposed to be safe, sterile, professional. What it was not supposed to contain was Carter, sitting on the floor with Whisper sprawled across his lap like an oversized, deadly house cat. Except that's exactly what Keshimara found when they arrived. Before you say anything, Carter said, looking up, she got out of her habitat. Not sure how yet. Found her wandering the corridors looking for me. Figured this was safer than letting her roam. Whisper's tail, thick as a human thigh and lined with bone ridges, thumped against the floor, in what could only be described as happiness. Her 6 eyes were half closed in contentment, and she was making that rumbling purr that still made xenobiologists question their understanding of Nightfang vocal capabilities. She got out, Keshmara repeated slowly. A Nightfang. Got out of a reinforced containment habitat. And instead of hunting, hiding, or causing mass panic, she went looking for you. Yeah, Carter said, scratching behind Whisper's ears. I think she imprinted on me. Happens sometimes with orphaned animals back home. They bond with their caretaker as a parental figure. You are not her parent. You are not even her species. Tell her that, Carter said, gesturing to Whisper, who had now rolled onto her back, exposing her vulnerable belly in a display of absolute trust. Keshmara realized something in that moment, watching this human and this apex predator existing in perfect harmony. The galaxy was going to have to rewrite its entire understanding of human-animal relations. More than that, they were going to have to reconsider what humans actually were. Not prey species who got lucky with tool use, not even simple predators who climbed to the top through aggression. Humans were something else entirely. They were pack builders, alliance makers. They looked at the universe's most dangerous creatures and saw not threats, but potential family members. And somehow, impossibly, they convinced those creatures to see them the same way. The collective wants a report, Keshmara said finally. They want to know if the human rehabilitation methods can be standardized, taught to other species, implemented across the network. Carter looked thoughtful. Maybe. But it's not really a method. It's more of a philosophy. You have to genuinely care. You have to see the animal as an individual, not a problem. You have to be willing to meet them where they are, even if where they are is scary. And if that means letting them bite your hand, Carter smiled, then you don't pull away. A proximity alert chimed, another transport arriving. Another species in need of rehabilitation. The work continued, as it always did. But now, Keshmara thought, watching Carter coax Whisper back toward her habitat, with promises of dinner and playtime, they had humans, which meant they had hope. Strange, unsettling, completely unhinged hope that walked into danger with a smile and came out with friends. The galaxy, Keshimara decided, was going to have to get used to that. Whisper's stripes flashed green as she padded alongside Carter, her massive form moving with predatory grace. She looked back once at Keshmara, and for just a moment, the supervisor could have sworn the Nightfang was laughing. Humans, it turned out, were contagious. 3 months after Whisper entered Carter's life, the universe decided to test exactly how far human pack bonding could go when faced with actual malice. The proximity alarms went off at what Carter had taken to calling stupid o'clock, that special time of night when nothing good ever happened, and everything that could go wrong usually did. He was halfway to the command center when Keshimara's voice crackled through the station-wide comm. Unidentified vessel approaching. Transponder signals identified as Grulmak's crew. This is not a drill. Security protocols engaged. Carter's blood went cold. Everyone in the conservation community knew that name. Grulmak ran the most successful poaching operation in 3 sectors, specializing in rare species that collectors would pay obscene amounts of credits to own. His crew was ruthless, well-armed, and had a nasty habit of leaving bodies behind. The station's security was minimal. This was a research facility, not a military installation. They had sensors, alarms, and reinforced doors. What they didn't have was anything resembling a fighting force. By the time Carter reached the command center, the situation had gone from bad to catastrophic. The poachers had breached the docking bay and were cutting through the security doors leading to the habitat wing. "They know exactly where they're going," Fenthqua said, his voice tight with fear. "Someone sold them our layout. They are heading straight for the high-value specimens." Straight for Whisper. Carter didn't think. Thinking was for people who had better options. He ran. The habitat wing was a corridor of reinforced glass and climate-controlled environments, each one housing creatures that represented the last hope for their species. Carter's feet pounded against the deck plating as alarm klaxons wailed. Behind him, he could hear Keshimara shouting something about waiting for help, about not being stupid, about humans and their death wishes. He ignored all of it. Whisper's habitat was at the end of the wing. Through the observation window, he could see her pacing, agitated by the alarms and the smell of fear that was probably permeating the station's air recyclers. Her bioluminescent stripes were flashing red. The color Carter had learned meant danger, threat, protect. The poachers rounded the corner just as Carter reached the habitat controls. There were 5 of them. Mixed species, all armed with weapons that looked entirely too serious for a simple robbery. Grulmak himself was in the lead. A massive reptilian with scales like armor plating and eyes that held all the warmth of a black hole. "Step away from the controls, human," Grulmak said, his translator rendering his hissing speech into flat, emotionless words. "We are here for the Night Fang. You can live or die. The choice is yours, and I do not particularly care which you choose." Carter's hand hovered over the habitat release. His mind was racing through options, and none of them were good. If he released Whisper, she might attack the poachers, but she was still young, still learning. 5 armed beings versus 1 adolescent predator. The math didn't favor her. If he didn't release her, they'd take her anyway, probably sedate her, ship her off to some collector who'd keep her in a cage for the rest of her life. "You don't want to do this," Carter said, surprised at how steady his voice sounded. Grulmak laughed. It was not a pleasant sound. "I assure you, I very much do. That creature is worth more credits than you will earn in your entire lifespan. Now move, or I will move you." One of the poachers raised his weapon. Carter hit the release. The habitat door hissed open, and Whisper emerged like violence given form. She was all midnight fur and crystal fangs and bioluminescent fury, her size suddenly much more impressive when not contained behind glass. The poachers stumbled back, weapons coming up, and Carter stepped in front of her. "What are you doing?" Grulmak hissed, genuinely confused. "Move, you fool! That creature will kill you!" "No," Carter said quietly. "She won't." Whisper pressed against his back, and he could feel the vibration of her growl through his entire body. Her breath was hot on his neck. Those crystalline fangs that could shred durasteel were inches from his spine. She didn't bite. "Here's what you don't understand," Carter said, and there was something in his voice now, something that made even Grulmak pause. "You see a valuable specimen, a thing to be taken and sold. But she's not a thing. She's family. And humans? We're really, really good at protecting family." "One human and one juvenile predator against 5 armed professionals," Grulmak said. "The mathematics are not in your favor." Carter smiled. It was not a nice smile. It was the smile of a predator who'd just realized he had the high ground. "Who said it was just us?" He raised his hand and snapped his fingers once, sharp and clear. The sound echoed down the habitat wing, and every single creature in every single habitat responded. The razorback's roar shook the walls. The stalker's hunting cry made the lights flicker. From a dozen different enclosures, a dozen different apex predators vocalized at once, a symphony of threat displays that evolution had designed to trigger every fear response in every prey species that ever existed. The poacher's eyes went wide. "You see," Carter continued, still standing there with Whisper at his back, "I've been teaching them, not just how to trust, but how to listen, how to respond to signals. It's what we did with wolves and dogs back home. Pack coordination. And the thing about pack coordination is, it works really, really well." He snapped his fingers again. Twice this time. The habitat doors began to open. Not all of them. Just the ones housing creatures that had bonded with humans over the past months. The ones that understood that Carter and his species were pack, were family, were worth protecting. The razorback emerged first, quills rattling like a promise of pain. Then the stalker, moving with that liquid grace that predators perfected over millions of years of evolution. Then 3 more species that the poachers had probably planned to steal, each one fully grown, each one absolutely lethal, each one positioning themselves between the intruders and Carter. "Still like your mathematics?" Carter asked. To Grulmak's credit, he was smart enough to recognize when a situation had gone sideways. His weapon lowered fractionally. "This is not over, human. We will return with more." "You really won't," came Keshmara's voice over the intercom. "Galactic security has been notified. They are en route. Also, I have recorded this entire encounter. You are being broadcast across 3 networks. Your careers in poaching are, I believe the human expression goes, toast." The poachers ran. Scrambled, really, tripping over each other in their haste to get away from the wall of predators that had somehow united under human leadership. It would have been funny if Carter's hands weren't shaking with adrenaline. The moment they were gone, Whisper nuzzled against him hard enough to nearly knock him over. Her stripes had shifted to that. Bright green that meant joy, safety, home. The other creatures didn't approach. They weren't bonded to Carter specifically. But they didn't retreat either. They'd answered his call because the humans had shown them that cooperation was better than isolation. Because humans had convinced an entire station full of apex predators that being part of something bigger was worth protecting. Keshmara appeared in the corridor, all 6 limbs moving in agitation. That was the most reckless, dangerous, absolutely insane thing I have ever witnessed. "Yeah," Carter agreed, sliding down to sit on the floor because his legs had apparently decided they were done holding him up. Whisper immediately draped herself across his lap. "Probably." "It was also brilliant," Keshmara admitted. "Terrifying, but brilliant." "That's humans for you," Tabitha said, arriving with Kwame and half the station staff. "We make friends with things that should eat us, and then we convince them to help us convince other things not to eat us." It's a whole system. A deeply unsettling system, Fenthqua added, but his feathers were settling back to normal, which meant he was calming down. Carter just sat there, surrounded by creatures that could kill him without breaking a sweat, feeling safer than he'd ever felt in his life. Whisper's purr rumbled through them both. The other predators began returning to their habitats, mission accomplished, pack protected. Keshmara watched it all with their compound eyes and finally understood what made humans so dangerous. It wasn't their tools or their intelligence, or even their stubborn refusal to acknowledge when they were outmatched. It was this, their absolute unshakable belief that the universe was better when you weren't alone in it. That family wasn't limited by species, or origin, or evolutionary history. That a scared cub biting a human's hand in fear could become a bond strong enough to face down armed poachers. "The collective is going to want a full report," Keshmara said. "Tell them the truth," Carter replied, scratching behind Whisper's ears. "Tell them that humans don't dominate through fear. We build bridges. We make alliances. We take the broken and scared things the universe throws away, and we give them a reason to trust again. And if they ask how you manage to coordinate multiple apex predators in a defensive formation," Carter grinned, "tell them we learned it from our wolves. 10,000 years ago, we looked at the most dangerous predator in our environment and decided to make friends. Been doing it ever since." Whisper's head was heavy on his chest, her breathing deep and even. The cub who'd tested him with her fangs, who'd submitted and trusted and bonded, was now grown enough to be dangerous, but still chose every day to be gentle. That choice, Carter thought, was what made all of this worth it. The galaxy would learn, eventually. Humans didn't conquer. They befriended. And in the end, that was so much more powerful.